Welcome to the channel Learn with Danish. Subscribe and hit the bell icon. Hello all, welcome to another video of literary criticism and theory. In this video we would be discussing an introduction to post-colonialism. Basically I'm trying to make another video which would cover the critics involved in post-colonialism. In this video, we would be talking about the features of post-colonialism, its etymology, its origin, its context, and basically all those stuffs. So let's get into the video without delay. Let's see what the term post-colonialism is all about. Now, when you look at that word post-colonialism, it has got two parts. Now, what are the two parts that I'm talking of? The first part is the root word colonialism. You might have heard of this term before, and this is derived from the Latin word colonia. Now, what is colonia? What does it literally mean? At the surface or the fundamental level of meaning, it means a farmland or landed estate. And I would be taking you into the original context of this term in the later slide. The second part of the word post-colonialism is the prefix post as such. So these two constituent parts would be dealt in detail in this video. Now let us look into the context of the term colonia, which is a derivative of the modern derivative of colonialism. So this is the map of the Roman Empire during 117 AD, which is considered to be the time when a Roman Empire had expanded to a great extent. So the Roman Empire had an aggressive and expansionistic policy for quite a long time, especially during the first 100 years of Common Era. So during that time, these two things, one is aggressive expansionistic policy. They were aggressive. They had fought lots of wars in order to acquire land. And the Roman Empire stretch, when you look at the stretch of the Roman Empire, we can say that it would stretch from modern day Iraq to in the east to the Portugal in the west. When you talk about north and south pattern, we see that Egypt is there in the south to England in the north. So it was indeed a very vast area as such. Now, in this expansionistic philosophy, the Roman Empire gave prize to veteran soldiers who fought for the empire with vast stretches of farmland or landed estate, which is called Colonia. So when the Roman Empire actually expanded, they gave a certain portion of this expanded territory to veteran soldiers as a sign of gratitude. Right? They showed it as a sign of gratitude, and these were formed from the newly occupied territory. Now these soldiers remained Roman citizens, but the empire demanded the native inhabitants to be under the subjugation of these soldiers as such. So when they conquered land, they gave some portion of the land to veteran soldiers, and these veteran soldiers actually subjugated the native people that inhabited the land. And this land was under the control of the Roman Empire as such. So colony is the modern day derivative of the word colonialism. Now, how it is the modern day derivative of the word colonialism? It is the modern day derivative because of the two principal aspects that was followed during the Roman practice. What are the two principal aspects followed? The first one is it is established through a process of violent subjugation. There is violent subjugation that is involved in the process of making a colony or making a colonia. The second one is it makes a relationship between two different territories. Now here two different territories are often coined with two different terminologies which are known as metropolis and the periphery. Now we'll look into detail what metropolis and the periphery is. So these two aspects were there during the Roman structure of the Colonia system, and this was also there during the present colonial system. When you look at the present colonial system, we are talking about the European colonies, especially that of Britain and France. Right? We'll discuss that in detail. Now, what is metropolis and periphery? Now, the picture that you see here is the courthouse of Caesar as such in Rome. So, metropolis literally translates into mother city or mother country. In the Roman context, the metropolis was naturally Rome, which is the center of the Roman Empire. Now this is another thing. This is a map of periphery system. Now what is periphery? Now look at the arrow signal that you see on the map. The arrow signal is signaled to certain places. For example, Rome. All the countries arrow signal to Rome as such. So periphery is the occupied territory of the colonias that were under the control of the Roman Empire or the mother country. So periphery is under the control of metropolis. So periphery is a colonia or the colonized land as such. These colonias were referred to as peripheries. Now colonialism is how it is used in the present context. The modern use of the word colonialism, as is reflected in post-colonial studies, is restricted to the subjugation of various countries in the south. In the south indicate the Asian continent basically, or African continent basically, by the European forces in the north, roughly from 15th century CE. Now when you look into the post-colonial, I'm not going in detail with post-colonial studies as such. When you look into post-colonial studies, you need to understand what is Commonwealth literature, what is discourse analysis text, and all those things. But basically, post-colonial studies, when you say the term post-colonial studies, it basically concentrates on the European forces subjugating the countries in the south. That is in Asia, in Africa, in Australia, etc. It goes like that. We don't generally associate it with any other conquering system like Roman or other empires in history. So post-colonial studies mainly focused on the impact of, among that, it mainly focused on the impact of the British and French colonialism in particular. Now, some characteristic features of modern colonialism. And one of the most important characteristic features of modern day colonialism is that it is built upon the principle of capitalism. Now, what is the function of capitalism? You might have heard of that term, capitalism. Now, let us look into the function of how does capitalism work actually in a country. It is the process of investing money to make profit. That is the most simplest explanation of the functioning of capitalism. It is the process of investing money to make profit. Now, what did the West do actually? The West was actually moving away from the feudal form of economy. You know that there was the feudal system, like the Tudor system was there in Britain or England, where you had the feudal form of economy that was flourishing. And this feudal form of economy was moving away from the Western countries to a capitalist mode of economy since long distance trade started. So during the 16th century, when you talk about India, for example, I think it is in the year 1600 that the English East India Company came to India to establish trade relations. Right. So the West started moving away from the so-called the British or United Kingdom, and they started moving to different places in order to establish the trade system. And through this particular movement that happened, we have the capitalist mode of economy that was rising in the West. And moreover, the Industrial Revolution, especially the first half of the 20th century, resulted in mass accumulation of products. And this became a great wealth for countries like Britain and France, which had colonies to a great extent. You might have heard of the British Empire, which did not, stating as the empire that did not witness any sunset. Now, in order to understand this particular principle of capitalism in general, we need to understand it on the basis of a profit making system, whether it is gaining profit or losing profit. In order to understand that, let us take the example of a product. Right. Suppose I manufacture a clothing material for myself and my family members or my relatives or my native people. As such, I would be manufacturing a certain number of products as such. So when the Industrial Revolution happened, the production actually multiplied. Right, production actually multiplied. Suppose I make a profit of 100 rupees. I because of the invent of Industrial Revolution, because of the invent of machineries and raw materials to be in plenty, we had lots of products being manufactured as such. Then what happened? There were rivalry inside, where you have the product. For example, my friend would again be selling the same clothing material that I am manufacturing, and he might be reducing the profit margin to 50 rupees. Right. In order to stay afloat, what would I do? In order to stay afloat in the business market, I would again reduce it by 25 rupees so that I can stay there in the market. So that is the competition that comes under capitalism. When trade goes global, when your product goes global, when your a manufacturing product goes global, there would be great competitors from different parts of the world. And what do these competitors do? Competitors would be selling that same product in their own perspective, their own profit margin based on certain conditions. Now, what is the remedy for maintaining the profit level? What should be the remedy as such? There are two ways that we can retain the highest profit margin in capitalism. You all know that. I'm not going in for the economic class or the commerce class as such, but still, in order to understand what colonialism is all about, you need to understand how this mechanism of capitalism work. So how does the highest profit margin work? The first one is by lowering the labor cost and the cost of raw materials that is used, thereby reducing the production cost. You know, the production cost is there, then you have the selling cost also. Right. So production cost should not increase than the selling cost. You have a retail price there. It should not increase the retail price, or it should not come near. If you have a very gap between the retail price and the production price, then you can have that much profit. So what you should do, you need to have low labor cost and low cost for raw materials that is used for the manufacture of that product. That is the first remedy that you can maintain highest profit. The second one is increasing the market share by producing the products in the market to a larger extent. Suppose I make 100 rupees profit margin, and there are a lot of competitors, and slowly I had to make I could only make 1 rupee profit margin per piece. if I increase my market share by producing more product, then I can just stand in that market with that same profit margin. In order to make one product, I would be making 100 products. So he or she still can make a profit of rupees 100. That is the case as such. So these are the two remedies that one can make or one can focus on in order to attain the highest. And the first remedy is quite interesting for the colonial system that existed during the first half of the 20th century, or maybe you can say from 18th to 20th century. So what did the colonists do? The metropolis, or the mother country, for example, here it is the British and French, the Britain. Metropolis developed raw materials required in the market from the peripheries. So, for example, when you take the example of Britain, they produced cotton from India. So, India is considered to be the periphery and Britain is considered to be the metropolis. And they also took the subjugated native as cheap labor force. They took the labor force from India and Africa to work for them in their factory by attaining the products from India, which is cotton, for example, and they expanded their market share and profit by doing this. So what did they do? They took the first remedy there. They reduced the production cost in order to attain high profit level. So the colonists also created but apart from that, they also did another thing. What did the colonists do? What did these people do? What did the Britishers do? They actually created a captive market. Now, what is captive market system? Captive market system is nothing but the colonized people buying the products from the colonizers' market. So, for example, an Indian buying a Britisher's product during the time of colonialism, right? So, for example, Indians were the market for textile industry that was flourishing in Manchester, for example, in the United Kingdom. So, that is how the captive market system is arranged, which is the prime principal focus of colonialism. So when you see that there is a connection between industrial capitalism and European colonialism as such, and this explains why that with the progress of industrial capitalism during the 19th and early 20th century, European colonialism also reached its peak. So it happened during the 19th and 20th century in particular, and this is the reason why European colonialism also reached its peak. Why colonialism flourished? Because of this particular industrial capitalism that was expanding worldwide. Is that clear? So, apart from capitalism as such, the second major feature that happened in that we need to concentrate on is which is often notoriously called the Scramble for Africa. Now look at this particular map. This particular map is designed with rainbow colors. You might be thinking like that, but in fact it is the colonial system in the African continent. Not a single, there are some parts of Ethiopia or some part of Somalia that is not colored as such, which is not under any significant colonial system. But apart from that, 95% of the African continent, I'm not talking about one country, I'm talking about a continent, was occupied by one or the other European powers as such. And this was done during a particular event that happened in the 19th century. So we see that only 10% of Africa was under the control of European powers during 1870s. So it was considered to be the dark continent, which was not accessible to the Europeans as such. Only 10% was colonized as such, especially the southern part of African continent. The Congo Basin, for example, was conquered by Belgium, was considered to be the first part, was the first to conquer land in Africa. By 1885, as much as 90% of Africa was colonized by the European powers, except Ethiopia, Liberia, part of Somalia that were not colonized. So only two or three countries were not colonized, but still almost 95% of Africa was colonized by 1885. That's the span of just 15 years. By 15 years, 90% colonization happens. Why? Because in the year 1884, there was the notorious conference that was held in Berlin, Germany, which was called the Scramble for Africa. And this particular notorious conference actually paved the way of distributing the different parts of geographical parts of African continent to different European powers of that time. And this was done under the guidance of the then German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck. So that was the condition, that was the conference, that was the notorious conference. Why it was notorious? Because there wasn't any single representative from the African continent. So, in short, the whole African continent was parceled away to the European powers as such. There was not a single African representative during the 1884 Berlin Conference that actually distributed different regions of Africa to different major powers of European colonial system. And we see that Belgium was one of the first countries to set colony in the Congo Basin. Why? Because of the trade in ivory and rubber. You might have read Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness. Right. Yes. Now, that is the general theory behind the term colonialism. Now look at the prefix post as such in post-colonialism. Now the prefix post is generally used to convey or suggest a thing or event that happens after the root event. So post-independent, for example, is something that means after independence. So after that particular event of independence happened. So post is something that is conveyed or that suggests a thing that has happened after the root event. Now, in that sense, one should assume that post-colonialism should also indicate the political or social or cultural or economic event that happens after colonialism. Now, what does the after colonialism mean? That is the problematic point. That is slightly confusing here. Right, after colonialism. Now, there is a confusion with what after colonialism indicate. But here, post-colonialism does not mean after the end of colonialism, but rather after the beginning of colonialism. Now, suppose a country is colonized by the European colonial power. So, since that time, even now, we consider it as something that is associated with the period of post-colonialism as such. It does not come after colonialism, but it comes before or after the beginning of colonialism. Now, in order to be more clear as such, we are all Indians. Let us bring it into the Indian context as such. Now, when you look at India, for example, India gained its political independence from the British rule on 15th August 1947. So this day was just the end of the political rule of British monarchy system, right? So after that, after 15th August 1947, British did not politically rule India. But we are still continuing the legacy of European colonizers even now. For example, the parliamentary system that we are following is the legacy of the West as such. The railways is the legacy of the West. So there are lots of things that is often used or are often still continued to be used under the legacy of the European colonizers. Therefore, we do not have a definite date when the European colonialism ends in India. Neither is it possible with any other colonized country. So we cannot say that colonialism ended on 15th August 1947 in India, because we are still following certain legacies of the colonizers as such. So that is the general possibility, general trend of other colonized countries too. So post-colonialism, under the aspect of post-colonial studies, bears with all the social, political, cultural, economical changes that was brought about following the first impact of colonialism. So when a country is first impacted by the system of colonialism, it is since then that post-colonial studies or post-colonialism, as we call it, is actually referred. Now again, let us look into the context of India as such. How does colonialism begin in India? You might think that colonialism begins in India with the British East India Company arriving in 1600, but rather it is not that. This is the picture of the Mughal Emperor Farrukhsiyar. Now what happened during his tenure? The Mughal Emperor Farrukhsiyar, in his Farman or in his declaration in 1717, note that here, in 1717, granted duty-free trading rights in Bengal province to the British East India Company. And it is since then that Britishers started colonializing different parts of India as such, because they were given duty-free trading rights. So that was the beginning of colonialism in India. We cannot say that when they came from Britain to India, that is in the year 1600, but rather during 1717 that British colonialism actually started in India. I hope that you have understood the term post-colonialism as such. We have discussed the two different roots of the word post-colonialism, that is colonialism at first. What are the features of colonialism? Then we have discussed the word post as such, and how do we understand the word in its exact terminology, right? If you have any doubts related to the topic that has been discussed so far, feel free to comment below. And till then, it's me, Danish, signing off. Have a good day. Learn with Danish.